This is the new Antigravity A1 drone backed by Insta360. And this is the world's first 360 drone, which completely changes how you view flying a drone in the sky.
I made it! I saw that!
So in this video, I'm going to show you a bunch of footage that I was able to capture using this drone, along with showing you what makes this drone so unique. So I had the opportunity to fly this drone for the last few days, and so I decided to jump in my car, drive out to Utah, and find some really epic locations that we can test this whole 360 drone. And so we're going to go through my experience working with this drone, tell you some of the features that I think are really interesting, and show you what's different between this drone and all of the other drones out on the market. So if you're ready, let's get into it. All right, before we jump into everything about this drone, I do want to do a quick disclaimer. First, this video is sponsored by Antigravity. And second, this drone is a pre-production, almost prototype version of the drone. This one doesn't have all of the features yet, and this one doesn't have full resolution. However, when this drone is available, it will shoot in 8K resolution. And so I was able to fly this drone, get a sense of how to use it, but I wasn't able to use every feature that this drone is going to have when these actually go into production and you'll be able to get your hands on one. And so keep that in mind when we're looking at the footage. This is beta firmware, it's a prototype, things will change with this drone. However, with that, even flying an early version of this drone really gives me a sense of what makes this so different and unique. It was actually kind of a learning curve to figure out how to fly this drone because I'm so used to different styles of drones, whether it's a traditional drone with a controller or an FPV style drone. If you've flown all of those types of drones, this is going to be a different experience. However, it's also a very beginner friendly experience, and I'll kind of explain why as we get deeper into this video. So first, let me just show you what this drone is. This is the A1. So right off the bat, you'll see that the camera is different. There's no gimbal. There's just two lenses on either side of the drone. And you have different vision sensors on the front and the bottom so that the drone can see where it is in the sky. But when it comes to the camera, you have a camera on the top and you have a camera on the bottom. And when you turn this on, you'll see that there's these little landing legs that pop out. So when you set this down, the bottom lens isn't going to touch anything, because that's one thing you have to worry about when you're working with 360 is you don't want to scratch either of these lenses. Now, when you take this off and start flying, the landing gear automatically folds in and it actually becomes a completely invisible drone. You look every direction, you don't see any bit of the drone. It's kind of like when Insta360 does the selfie stick with like the X5, you don't see the selfie stick, it's just a floating camera. This takes it a step further because it's a floating camera in the sky that can basically fly anywhere. Now with that, I'm sure you're wondering, how do you actually control this drone? Well, they have this, which is called a grip. And this grip is a one-handed controller that uses the motion of your wrist to be able to control the drone in the sky. And there's a few things that are different from other drones that I've flown that use this style of controller. Now, when you take it off, you have a switch here that makes the drone ascend or descend. And you basically click this, press up, and the drone will ascend into the sky. Now on the screen, you're going to have a circle, and that's going to direct you where you're going to be pointing the drone. And when you pull the trigger, it's going to fly in that direction. And when you point the grip down or you bring it up, the drone's going to act like an FPV drone where it goes up and down. And when you rotate the grip around, it's going to spin the drone. So it uses the motion of the grip to be able to fly in the sky. But it's going to actually work differently than an FPV drone, even though it feels, when you first start using this controller, like a motion controller that you see on DJI's drones. Now, there's buttons that you would find standard, like a stop button, record button or take a photo button, a power button, a menu button. And then there's a couple other buttons here that are all going to be different features as more features are added to this drone and the firmware is upgraded. The one thing that's unique about the grip is you got this dial that rotates left and right. This is different because when you're actually flying and you're looking around, if you press and hold the grip and you're moving in one direction, you can look with your goggles in a different direction and the drone will continue to fly where your controller has originally pointed. You're going to see a little box pop up on screen and that will show where the drone's headed, but you could still be looking around. This is the really bizarre thing about flying this drone, because at first you want the drone to fly where you're looking, but the reality is you can do a whole 360 head tracking motion, look around like it's a 360 camera, but your drone will still be flying in the same direction that you're pointed. And then if you want to reorient yourself, that's where this dial comes in. So if I'm headed, say, straight towards you, and I want to actually switch my position to make the drone fly that way, I can spin this dial and it will take my point and then shift it to that back point so that now when I'm pressing the trigger, it's moving that way. So it like recenters where the drone's heading is. And it's a very different way of flying. And the first few flights that I went on, I was really trying to just get a sense of like, how do I make this drone move in the sky for the shots that I want? Because when you're working with this drone, it's very much fly, get your shots, like get the angle that you're going, and then reframe later in the editing software, because that's where the magic happens with 360 cameras. And you have to start thinking about drone flying a little bit differently. Now, the third piece to working with this drone are the anti-gravity goggles. Now, these are unique. You can already tell they're white. They got the antenna that stick up, but you actually have two screens in the front. One of them is going to become a menu system, but the other eye is actually a screen. So whenever I was out flying, whoever was around me could watch the screen and actually see where my head was pointed. So there was moments where I was on a cliff at sunset and I was looking around, looking at the view, and the people that were around me were watching what I was seeing right here in the screen. And it's such a cool experience for not just me, being in this space, but someone else can actually see what's going on. And on this trip, I brought one of my buddies with me, and he was watching the whole time when we were flying to just see where I'm at, see what's going on. And it became a different experience where you didn't have to have like an additional device to be able to see what's going on in the drone. Now with the goggles, you have a battery and this hangs around your neck so that it's no weight on your head. And these goggles are actually pretty lightweight. And when you're actually flying, like I mentioned earlier, at any point you could look around and you're looking around in that 360. So if you've worked with a 360 camera before and you've just played around looking around when you're in your editing software, you could basically do that live when you're recording and then keep flying in a separate direction. It's a really unique experience and one that really changes the way that you think about flying with this drone. And I think on my last day out in Utah flying with this drone, it really kind of dawned on me what makes this so different, because it's not just a new drone, it's actually just a new way of flying. And the reason I say that is on that last day, I was this epic view watching sunset. Sun was dipping down way off in the distance. The cliffs were turning this bright orange color. And at that point, I'd figured out how to actually use this drone. So I was flying in these different paths that I decided I wanted to go on. And then I was able to actually take a step back, relax, and look around and actually just kind of experience the sunset in this place from a different perspective. I didn't really have to focus so much on necessarily the shot because I knew I could reframe later. So I was able to get these shots where I'd be flying like straight along the cliffs and I was seeing that little screen of where I'm flying. But at the same time, I could also look up, I could look down, I could look over this way. And while I'm flying, I'm able to see a 360 of what's going on. And so you start to experience the flying a little bit more than other drones. It's kind of weird to think about, but it is a different kind of experience. And that's ultimately what Antigravity's mission is with this new company. It's that it's a new experience, a new way of flying, a new way of thinking of drones, which there hasn't been these big changes in how drones work. The biggest thing has been longer lenses, which has a different capability. But this, with 360, you had to like add things onto your drone to be able to do 360, and you didn't have this immersive flight experience before. It was very much, if you wanted to do 360 on a drone, you would add some components to an existing drone, and then later you'd be able to go through and reframe. But this is different because when you're flying, it's an experience as well as also capturing the 360 footage. So the places that I flew this drone, I went out to an abandoned water park. It's halfway between LA and Vegas. Really kind of cool. And this was my first flight. Now, what I learned here is that motion actually affects how you fly a lot. So I've been to this place and I've flown here with my DJI Avata. Using an FPV drone versus this drone, it's different because when you're in an FPV drone, when you're flying with something like the Avata, where you're looking is where the drone is filming and where it's flying. So as you're going through these buildings and whatnot, the only shot you're getting is from that screen and where you're pointed. Whereas first, when I was trying to use this grip, I was trying to fly in that same way. And then I realized you don't have to do that because you can reframe later. So it almost changed the way that I started to think about how to fly this drone, because at first I was trying to fly down into the abandoned lazy river and go around, and it just wasn't working. And I was like, what is going on? I'm trying to fly it in this way. And I realized you don't need to fly with these crazy motions built in because you can add these later. So instead, it's almost better with this drone to fly in a straight path. And then in post, you go through and reframe and create your shot. And on this grip, you have cinematic, normal, and sport mode. So you could fly super fast with this drone, or you could fly super slow. And I tested it out. Obviously getting more motion, more speed is going to give you really dynamic footage. But because you're going to be reframing later, you almost don't need to shoot as fast, because you'll want to have some time to be able to move from here to here to here when you're actually flying this drone. And so for my first few flights, I was flying fast and I was trying to get these more dynamic shots. And then I slowed down and I put it more in cinematic mode, and I tried to just get closer to objects. And then what I was able to do is go through and reframe it. And what's really cool about this drone is that you can actually look up, which is really hard with other drones. You can get a high angle with other drones, but you can't just look up at any point. So you can see in this shot, I'm flying through the park and I go right through the entrance to the Rockahula water park, but I could edit this in the Insta360 software and go from a perspective where we're flying towards it, look up, switch, and back. And now you're seeing the water park off in the distance. That kind of shot is just not something you can do with a traditional drone. You can't do these spins. I've tried them in different ways, and you can lock onto your subject and do this, but it's a really hard technique. Whereas to get this shot, it's just super easy because you just have to fly in a straight line. I mean, I did have to fly through an object, so you have to be comfortable flying through objects. But if you're comfortable with that and you fly in a straight line, you could do these different motions where you're seeing up, and you can also do the same thing, seeing down and seeing backwards. And so you could flip the camera in these different directions, which is just such a different way to think about how you're flying, because when this drone's in the air, it's just flying in a straight line. That's all we're doing. And then I come back in the software and I'm able to create these dynamic shots. Now, after I was done with this water park, I continued on to Utah, and there was a few things I wanted to try and shoot when I was out in Utah. One of them was chasing fast-moving objects. So my buddy Jesse was in a Razor and I was chasing him through the forest. Now, we did a few different takes of this, and we were started on this epic cliff landscape, and then I was trying to chase him through the forest. Now, there's a couple ways to kind of play around with this footage. So in the studio, I'm able to actually lock onto the subject and there's auto track them. So this would be like a standard drone where you're tracking a subject through a forest, and you can do this in camera. However, with the A1, it's 360, you could do this later. So I track the Razor as it goes through the forest, and this is the kind of shot I can get. And what I could do with it is then change the perspective. So if I want to widen out or if I want to zoom in, I can play around with that in the editing software. And I was able to track him as he was going quick through this forest. And the way I was flying is I was just kind of following the path, whether it was down the trail or it was kind of skimming along the trees. And one of the things I noticed with this drone, it's going to look a lot better and a lot more dynamic if you can fly closer to objects. It's a wide lens. It's a 360 lens. So you're getting a lot of movement when you're flying closer to objects. Definitely had some close calls. And because this is a pre-production unit, there's only like 3 of these in existence. So it survived. That's all I have to say. But I was trying to get close and through objects and really trying to get in there so that I could get the shots where you see a lot more of this dynamic motion. Now, when Jesse was driving the Razor, at one point we were basically doing this path where we drive out to this water tower and then drive back to the cliffs. It was a kind of a cool place that I could fly, had a strong signal between that whole section. I could see where the drone is the whole time. So it was a good area to fly. However, at one point, I was starting the track again. I was waiting at the beginning of the trail where the water tanks were. And I was like, where'd Jesse go? Like the Razor should have just spun around and kept going back on the trail. And I started to look around, and then I realized he rolled the Razor. And I didn't see it in the goggles because I was looking out in the other direction. Well, I came back, looked in the editing software, and sure enough, behind me, where I wasn't looking, he rolled the razor over to on the side. And I was able to still get that shot, even though I didn't even know that was going on. So that's one of the unique things about with 360 is that you're shooting in 360 at all times. So if something happens behind you and you don't even realize it's going on, you can reframe the camera later and be able to grab that shot. Now, another interesting thing that happened that I noticed in the edit is that I was playing around with some of the footage on the cliff, and there was these birds that looked like they were trying to attack the drone. You know, sometimes birds don't like drones, especially like hawks or seagulls. I've seen, drones get taken out. I've had birds come after my drones before, but when I was flying along the cliffs and I was getting just kind of this pretty view. And I saw some birds kind of fly by here and there, but I didn't really know what was going on. When I went back to edit, I realized that these birds were coming right at the drone from behind me, and I'm able to reframe to actually follow their path and watch what they're doing. So this whole sequence here, I didn't really know this was going on, but now I was able to reframe it. We could watch these birds as they were trying to come after the drone when I was out there flying. So it's the ability to film in 360 and reframe later that opens up the potential to get some unique styles of shots and pick up stuff that you didn't even know that you were recording. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, keep in mind, this drone will be able to shoot in 8K. So we're not seeing the full resolution yet. There is going to be changes to the software and everything going forward, but I think the footage looks pretty solid out of a 360 camera just from what I was able to get. Now, at the beginning, I mentioned that this drone would be really suitable for beginners. And the reason for that is that you really don't have to do these complex shots to be able to get complex footage. So you just fly in a straight line, or you just have the drone sit there and hover. And because of this reframing ability, anybody can go through and get some dynamic shots that are really unique and interesting. So for this sample, I wanted Jesse to be sitting on the cliff, and I wanted to create this dynamic shot showing the whole environment. What I did with the drone is I just flew straight out. That's it. There was not a whole lot of motion besides just flying straight. What I was able to do in the editing software is start looking up at the trees. You don't know what's going on. Come down to him, spin around him, and then come out doing a droney, seeing Jesse sit there on the cliffs, and that you get this wide shot. And then from there, I could also spin around and see what's going on. So a simple shot that would have been just been a drone flying past Jesse, or a drone flying, looking at him and coming straight out, now turns into this dynamic shot where you could do all of these different shots in one that shows the entire landscape, and you can do it in one take. Now, this drone is an early prototype, and there's actually potential that you can work with the Antigravity team if you're interested in this drone. So Antigravity is bringing on some beta testers to really play with this drone and really shape the final retail product. And basically what they're looking for is feedback. And from this feedback, from you working with this drone and playing with this drone, there's actually a $20,000 prize pool that's going to be awarded to different users and their feedback working with this drone. So if you have some creative ideas on how to use this drone, or you think you might have some feedback if you were to actually take this out and play with it, then head to antigravity.tech. And I'll put a link down below in the description to where you can check out more information about this beta tester program and the feedback that they're looking for. So if you're a 360 user or a drone flyer, this could be a super interesting program for you to be a part of. And so I'll put that in the link for you to check out after you're done watching this video. I think that this drone is different. It's unique. And for a first gen product, I think this is going to be a really interesting drone. And it's going to really open up creative flexibility for users that really want to take a 360 camera and do a lot of this reframing later. So I'm curious, if you got your hands on one of these drones, what kind of shots would you get with a 360 camera flying in the sky? Would this be a useful tool for you in the videos that you're creating? Now, and after using it for a few days, it's something that I definitely want to play with more and see how I could use this to tell stories and create these dynamic shots when I'm out filming. So if you want to know more information about this drone, or you want to be part of the early tester program, I'll put a link down below in the description for you to check it out. And I'll see you on the next one.